My name is Dean Phelps. What we're going to do today is a getting started with CDM Plus accounting. We're really going to go over the basics of CDM Plus accounting, and in a lot of ways, I'm going to assume that those of you that are participating don't have a lot of accounting knowledge. That may not be a good assumption, but we're really trying to cover the basics here. Really, what accounting is all about is practicing good stewardship. We have been blessed with resources that we're called to manage, to be stewards of, and that we're also called to be able to give an accounting of how we use those resources. So that's what an accounting system is all about. Sometimes we think of it as something that has to do with business, and certainly part of the business of the church is providing an accounting of the resources that we've been blessed with and how we use those. What we want to cover today is I really want to take a look at fund accounting. That's the system of accounting that CDM Plus uses. And so talk a little about the what and the why. I want to look at the financial statements for a church or nonprofit organization. There are three reports that really comprise a total financial picture for a church or for a nonprofit. I'm a begin with the end in mind kind of person. And so if we look at those reports, at the ways we provide that accounting as the output of what we do, then it helps us to think about how we do some of the setup work. So as we're doing the work to set up a chart of accounts, or we're looking at how a chart of accounts has already been set up, or we need to make changes to it, we can think about it in terms of how is that going to affect those financial statements? How is my output going to be affected by the changes that I make? Just in case some folks are really brand new to CDM Plus accounting, we'll take a quick look at how you enter beginning balances after you've set up a chart of accounts to really hit that ground floor level. Now we're set up, now we're ready to go. And we'll also look just a little bit at how we then record activity in CDM Plus accounting. We'll look at how deposits and checks get entered, but we'll also talk a little bit about, yes, we can do that directly in the accounting program by doing journal entries, but there are other parts of CDM Plus that actually enter that activity for us. So I want to talk a little bit about those things that sit around so that I don't have to dig so much into the general ledger of our accounting system and make journal entries, but I have these other parts of the program that just as a result of my normal workflow, make the adjustments, make the entries in the accounting system that then lead into and provide input for the reports that get provided to the board and to leaders of the congregation. So fund accounting is a method of accounting that is used primarily by nonprofit organizations. So certainly churches, some schools fall into this. And the standard that we have to meet as nonprofits is the largest part of our income, the source of resources, are donations. By and large, it's donations. So what the accounting standard says is we have to do our accounting and our reporting in such a way that it demonstrates that the donations that we receive are used according to the donor's intent. Those resources, those donations may be restricted or may be unrestricted. So for example, we hold a worship service on Sunday morning, and people who are regular attenders, regular participants, regular members of the church, regular givers will make a regular tithe or offering to the church, and it's just for the general support and ministry of the church. And so that's an unrestricted resource. On the other hand, we may have a building fund or other special campaign. And so if I, as a church member, make a contribution and I say this is a contribution to the building fund, then I have put the restriction on that contribution can only be used for the purposes of the building fund. And so a fund accounting system is a way that allows us to record the financial activity in such a way that we're able to demonstrate that the donor's intent is being honored, that the gift is being used according to that intent. There are really three reports that make up a set of financial statements for a church or for another nonprofit. One is a balance sheet, and this is sometimes also called a statement of financial position. It's a report that will indicate what the total net worth of the organization of the church is. So on a balance sheet, we're going to list the church's assets, and these might be cash, like checking accounts or savings accounts. These might be investments. The church may own land or a building or furnishings. There may be liabilities. There may be payroll taxes that we have not paid yet. There may be a mortgage for a building or for property. And then the net of that, my assets, less the way those assets have already been earmarked as liabilities, well, that's the net worth. And those are expressed as fund balances. An income and expense report shows the activity against that net worth of the organization. How has that changed? Has that gone up? Has that gone down? How have the income of resources into the church and the investment, the outflow or the expenses affected the availability of resources? So I look at that number as positive or negative. And then a third report that sometimes gets overlooked is the fund activity report. And this takes income and expenses and really breaks it down by each of those funds. And again, we're going to take a look at each of these three reports in CDM Plus and then use that as a guide to step in and look at the chart of accounts and how that gets built and how those things affect how those reports get entered. And let's take a look at the balance sheet first of all. So this is an example of a balance sheet out of CDM Plus. And you can see that it begins by listing the assets of the church. And we have these grouped together first as cash accounts. And we've grouped together as cash accounts a checking account, a savings account, some investments. In this example, we've got accounts receivable showing as a cash account. Before I do this again, I'll actually change that because accounts receivable isn't really a cash account. But we'll look at the chart of accounts and see how it got set up that way. And so we're seeing here the balance in each of those accounts as of this date. So we list out the balances for each of those accounts. We give a total for this grouping. We do the same thing for our fixed assets. These are things that are not readily expendable. So in this example, we have a bus, we have a church building, and we have furnishings that we've purchased. So I have a total for that grouping, and then I have a total for all of my assets as well. So this is a total of all the financial assets, the resources that the church has. There may be already things that those resources are earmarked for, so liabilities. What are the things that we owe? And again, you see we've got two groupings here. We've got a group of current liabilities, and the first four items here are items that come out of payroll. We have tax liabilities, taxes that we have withheld or matching that we owe and have not yet paid. So we're showing on the balance sheet here that yes, I have this cash in the bank, but I have to use some of it to meet these liabilities. I also have some accounts payable. So I have things that I owe that I need to use those cash resources for. And so again, I've got a total for that current liabilities grouping. We also have a mortgage. And so we borrowed money towards the purchase of property and building. I have assets and I have liabilities. And that gives me a net total in all my funds of $482,379. And we express that in a fund accounting system as the various fund balances. So we're showing that in the general fund, I have $27,546.32. Again, I have an assortment of designated funds. So that's an indication of the financial position of the church. So how does that change in a given period of time. Well, that is expressed with income and expenditures. And again, notice that I have income items grouped together as regular income and designated. Here's what's come in, $43,200 over this block of time. Again, I'm using the first half of 2014. So we've received income of $43,200. 39, almost $36,000 of that is regular income. Almost $7,300 of it is designated. What expenditures did we have over those 6 months that also affected how that does? And we've got these grouped together as well so that I can see all of my personnel expenses. I can see all of my administrative expenses totaled. Then for various ministries like Christian education. For property, we've broken out is this general property or utilities. So I can see those things separately and see a total of the cost of maintaining or managing the property. Ministries like worship and outreach, and then designated expenditures as well, in this case, the building fund. Then my over-under at the end says, okay, for this 6-month period, available resources to the church has changed by an increase of $10,578 and some change. And so that's what an income and expense report does, is show how the balance sheet is changing over time. I've got a question on the chat room. I set up my categories and subcategories, and my balance sheet doesn't list the individual accounts within them. Is there a way to expand the balance sheet to show those details? Same question on the income and expense report. And the answer is yes. What you're seeing here, if you look at the heading of this report, what you're seeing is income and expenditures, and this part of the heading shows you that I'm running a detail report. So if I come over here and grab the report window that I used to generate this report, here on the report tab, I have detail selected. It sounds to me like what you have is composite selected. So if I select composite and I print that report, then the heading changes and I get things summarized by category and subcategory. But the heading here tells me which format the report is in. And that's true for all of these financial reports. We could do the same thing on the balance sheet. I can choose detail to list the individual accounts, or I can choose composite to just show me totals by the categories and subcategories, those groupings that I've set up in my chart of accounts. And we're going to get to the chart of accounts here in just a minute and show you how those things get set up. The last report I want to take a look at is the fund activity report. And this looks very much like the income and expense report, but its purpose is really to show you across those funds, how have those fund balances changed. So this first page of the report is for my general fund. Again, notice in the report heading, we can see that we're printing this as a detail report. I could print it as composite. But here in the general fund, what's happened? We had a beginning balance of $19,962.40. Then over the course of these 6 months, I've had these income items come in, a total of $35,905. I've had these expenses for personnel, for administration, for property, and this is just within the general fund. And so those expenditures totaled $28,321.08. So if I take my beginning balance, add the income, subtract the expenditures, as of June 30th, the balance available in my general fund is $27,546.32. This report gets paged by the different funds, so I move on and I can see in the building fund that I began with a balance of $5,088. I had income of $69.95. I had expenditures of $4,300. And so I have an ending balance as of June 30th for $7,783. And again, for all of my funds where there were activity, in the missions fund, I received income of $300. So those are the financial reports. There are other accounting reports available. Those are the three that really make up a set of financial statements. So let's take a look at the chart of accounts itself. And to find this, I didn't point out earlier, to get to those reports that I was using, we used the reports menu in CDM Plus, accounting reports, and each of those three reports is under ledger year to date. So there's the income and expenditures report, there's the balance sheet report, and there's the fund activity. So all three of those reports are here under reports, accounting reports, ledger year to date. To look at the chart of accounts, I'll go to Program, Accounting, Ledger, Chart of Accounts. And when I do that, that brings up this window. And there are 4 tabs on this window. We have these 4 tabs. So I want to take a look just at the balance sheet account, and specifically, just as we're getting started, look at these 6 asset accounts. These are the accounts that we saw on the balance sheet in that asset section. And you might recall that they were grouped together first by cash accounts and then by fixed assets. And so all that grouping happens by category. And remember, I notice here there's a 7th asset account down here for accounts receivable that we have categorized as a cash account. So the categories that you use for grouping accounts together, and again, when you're thinking of categories and subcategories, what you're really talking about is on my reports, how do I want to group things together? How do I want to subtotal things? Or if I run in composites so that I'm just showing those subtotals, how do those need to appear in a way that reflects the ministry of our church, our congregation? And that's done over here on the Categories and Subcategories tab. That's where you create these. And so you can see that category, and I can also drop down and look at subcategories. You may remember on the income and expense statement, not only did we have property, but under that we had general property and utilities. And we'll look at how that's set up as well. On my categories, let me sort that back by code. On my reports, these groupings are always going to show in the sequence of the code that I create. So it's not done off of the description, but this code determines the sequence that those reports happen in. I mentioned that accounts receivable isn't really a cash account. It's really, in accounting parlance, a short-term asset. So if I want to fix that, I can come in here in the categories section, and I can add a category that I'm going to call short-term assets. I want that to appear in between cash accounts and fixed assets. So I need to make some adjustment here and let this be A2, and I'm going to make the code for my cash accounts A1. And I save that. So now I'm going to sort by code again. So now I've got these 2, then I've got these 3 categories. So I'm going to come back over to my balance sheet accounts. And instead of A1 cash accounts for accounts receivable, I'm going to put it in the category of A2 short-term assets. And I'm going to save that. So now let's watch what happens if I go back and get the balance sheet and I print that report again. Now you can see how my grouping changed on the reports. So now I've got groupings for cash accounts, short-term assets, and fixed assets, and I have my accounts receivable in that short-term assets category. So that's how categories and accounts work together in setting up your chart of accounts. Again, I'm a begin with the end in mind kind of person. So as we're setting up a chart of accounts, I always want to start by thinking, what does the output need to look like? We also create liability accounts, and we create fund balance accounts. So we're saying, what are the various funds? The equity of the church, how does that allocated across, or what's available in each of these unrestricted or restricted funds? So you can see I've used a category so that on the balance sheet, those things get grouped together. My general fund is assigned to the category for undesignated. My missions fund, for example, is assigned to the category designated. That's what groups those things together and provides those totals. Remember, we also had equity funds, so we have those assigned to a separate category as well. We do a very similar thing for income and expense accounts. On an income and expense account, there are a couple of things that I have to do. I do assign it to a category, again, so when I'm running a fund activity report or when I'm running an income and expenditures report, how do those things group together? For income and expense accounts, each of those has to be related to or connected to a fund balance account. And these are the same fund balances that we set up over here on the balance sheet accounts tab. And the reason we do this is so that as something comes into or goes out one of these income or expenditure accounts, the appropriate fund balance gets adjusted as well. So we're able to always calculate at any point in time what a fund balance is. So for example, when we receive gifts through the Sunday worship offering and we make that deposit and we say this is account number 4,000, we're automatically adjusting the fund balance for the general fund because of the assignment that's been made in this category. Same thing is true on the expense side. So here, where I have building fund expense, as I have expenses out of the building fund, however I've designated for that to be used, recording expenses out of that building fund, assign it to the building fund fund balance account. So again, I can automatically calculate what the availability, what's available in that fund, what that fund balance is. Again, you can see here, like we saw the property grouping on the income and expense reports, subcategories, let me just have another level of grouping. So your categories and subcategories, again, are about how do we group things together on the financial reports. I want to show you this tab because there are other places where you open up the chart of accounts window. So as you're making entries, so if you're making entries for checks or deposits, and you need to know what account number something should be assigned to, the account browser is sometimes an easy way to find that. So I can come over here and I know if I'm looking for an expense account, I can drop this list open. I clicked on the little triangle there to the left. And again, I can find quickly my office supplies account. If I'm setting up my chart of accounts, I don't really use the account browser tab, but as I'm using accounting and I'm needing to make entries and needing to look up accounts, this tab I think you'll find will be very helpful. That's the chart of accounts. CDM Plus is really a comprehensive system. And so where we can make entries directly in the accounting program. I can go in and make ledger entries. I can record deposits and checks that way. So I can come into accounting, go to the ledger, go to ledger entries. And on this window, I can add journal entries, I can add checks, I can add deposits. So if I go to add a check, he'll open up this window, give me an image of a check. He'll keep track of the check numbers for me, the date. I can click the blue file folder icon, get a list of the vendors so I know who this is being written to. So in this case, Lewis Street Glass. And we wrote them a check for $35. And then over here on that vendor, I've got an account number assigned. I can use this little account picker icon. And again, what that's going to do is open up the select account, which looks very much like that chart of accounts window. And again, I've got the account browser available to me. So I can do that. That's one way to enter. Certainly I can do checks that way. I can add deposits that way. One thing that I might point out, accounting is a double entry process. Everything you do affects two things. So if I'm entering a deposit, well, I have to say what account money is going into. And then on the breakdown, I have to say what the source of that money was. So in this case, it's a deposit income, my Sunday worship offering. How much was my deposit? 3,500, all of that. And I can break that down across multiple line items. So I can do my ledger entries this way. This is one way of recording activity in my accounting system. It's also, in my thinking, the most difficult, because there are other parts of the CDM Plus program that feed into this. For example, the contributions program, you enter a batch of contributions, and then when you're done with that, you're given the opportunity to post those to the ledger. Well, when you do that posting to the ledger, what you're doing is creating an entry over here in accounting. And we've used your giving funds to match up money to accounts and cause the adjustments to happen, reflect that change on your financial statements. Here in a couple of weeks, we're doing a class on using accounts payable in CDM Plus to pay bills. So that's a way that checks get written. Again, I don't have to come in here to ledger entries and do an add check. I can let the accounts payable system take care of that for me. If you're using payroll, then there are multiple things that need to happen, but the payroll system does that. When you write the checks, those check entries get recorded in accounting, and I can come back here in ledger entries and look those up. Payroll also has to record tax liabilities. So a lot of the entries, a lot of the accounting activity really gets handled by other parts of the program.
Can you show us a sample entry of a check and a journal entry and a deposit?
So over here on the ledger entries window, what I started to do earlier, if I'm going to record everything as a ledger entry, for example, so if I'm going to write a check, then I would come over here in the add sidebar and I'm going to add a check. And again, CDM Plus is going to keep track of my next check number. I need to choose the account. Again, everything happens in two places. So I have to have an account that this is coming out of. So I choose my checking account, and he goes, okay, your next check number is 1107. Who is this check to? I click the blue file folder icon, and that opens up the vendor list. So this is the electric bill, and we're writing the check for $257.88.
Does CDM automatically remember the account number? Like here you have 5260. Does it automatically remember that every time you pull up Big City Electric?
It remembers it for Big City Electric because on the vendor record for Big City Electric, I have said the default account number for this vendor is 5260.
Great. Can you split, like Big City Electric, can you split that into more than one account?
Yeah, so I could say that, you know, $200 of this is for this 5260 account, and he automatically gave me another line item, said, hey, you're not done yet.
Perfect.
Everything has to be in balance. Now, again, I'm showing you how to do this, and I'm also going, there's a better way. Because
okay.
what I really
because I'm not about the journal entry ones. It's like, you have to think too hard for that. I'm more
exactly
like go in and just write a check and
yeah.
let the system do its thing.
Exactly. And so I can come over here, I can do this as writing a check. And this is kind of keeping that, you know, if I'd done this, let me go ahead and save this. Let me pick an account for this 5788. And for whatever reason, youth ministry expense. You know, we're just doing an example here. So I'm going to save that. So I've just recorded a check. I haven't printed it. I haven't actually written anything. That's another story. But I've recorded the check.
Okay.
Now I can hit the entry tab here and I can see what that looks like as a journal entry. But I'm with you. Unless you've got a lot of accounting experience, you don't really need to think about what's a debit and what's a credit.
Mm-hmm.
You really want the system to do that for you. So if you're writing a check, and you're going to use the ledger entry window to do it, come over here and add check.
If you have in the current, well, this is what I'm having to deal with, is when I get started, I have to go into journal entries that were made previously by somebody else, and they were coded, or not coded, they were entered incorrectly. So an expense is showing as an income instead of an expenditure. So, and I'm not familiar enough, or wasn't familiar enough with your system to know how to get in there. Do you go back to the original journal entry or check if you need to make a correction?
Oh, okay. So I got this account number wrong. It should not have been 5180.
Okay, good.
Now here's the qualification. And when I do accounting 201, we'll cover the business of opening and closing accounting periods. I would want to close accounting periods because once a board or a council approves the financial reports for a month or a quarter, what some churches lose sight of is when the board does that, they have taken a legal action. They have entered the financial statements into the legal record of the church.
Right.
So we should not be allowed then to go in and make entries or change entries. They're going to change that.
Well, that's where the journal entry would come in, because you've got to have a memo that tells you why.
Yeah, and that's where, so if I've got a closed period, I can't change this. But we're in an open period, and this is just as simple as, hey, this should not have been 5180. Again, over here in the sidebar, I can change it.
Now, does CDM require a closing? Like, if I'm in the same calendar year, it's not closed yet.
Closing periods is entirely up to you. We don't force you to do it.
Okay, great. And that's advanced. We'll worry about that
later. Yeah, so I make my change to the account number. I save it.
Okay.
Now, another thing is, all right, other actions I can take on this particular check or this particular entry is I could delete it. I'm not a fan of doing that in my own accounting practice. Now, what actually goes on in the database is we just mark it as deleted.
Okay.
I'd much rather see things get voided.
Right.
Because there again, I've got a memo that says this was voided on this date by this person, and you can type in there and say why.
Okay, good.
So I have the ability to do that. If I want to add a deposit, we're talking about something very similar as well. I can click on Add Deposit. And again, what checking account is this going into? What's the total amount of the deposit? It's $3,000. Choose the account. Well, part of it is the Sunday worship offering, and that's $2,700 of it. Again, he's keeping up with me, saying, yeah, you're not done yet. This isn't in balance. So I'll use my account picker. Again, we'll mark some of it as loose offering. We'll make that 100. Again, you're not done. He's not going to let me finish until it's in balance. And the rest of this I'm going to mark as the Sunday school offering. And so now here I've got a deposit, and I save it. Now, again, I want to emphasize that there are other parts of the program that take care of this. So, for example, what I just did, if I have the contributions program for CDM Plus, then what's happened is a batch of contributions have been recorded so that we now have that recorded for the donors, and we can produce their giving statements. We know what funds they've given to, and at the end of the batch processing, it says, hey, are you ready to post this to the ledger? And this entry actually gets taken care of for us. I don't have to come in here and create a ledger entry for it. And I can look for my ledger types equal to contributions. I just want to show you what one looks like. So, here is the resulting journal entry that got created because we recorded a batch of contributions, then posted those to the ledger. And he'll give you warnings here at the bottom, like in those situations. Hey, if you need to correct something here, what you actually need to do is go back to contributions and fix it there, and then repost.
Where can I find the videos that you have from the back trainings?
Let me go ahead and give you that. The address is KB. It stands for Knowledge Base. .cdmplus.com. And if you go to that address, there's a tab for videos, or you can just go straight to the /videos address. And the videos are up there by order of most recent first.
Do you have time for another question?
Sure, I sure do. I sure do.
Okay, I'm in the same boat as the previous speaker. I'm taking over the bookkeeping. I've been doing payroll, so I'm somewhat familiar with CDM, but I didn't know how to void a check, and I had to do it yesterday. And the instructions the previous bookkeeper left were to delete it, like you showed in your example. But I would rather void it, like you said, so that there is more of a paper trail. I mean, I took screenshots and attached them to my detail just so I could prove that I had done it. But I would like a better way.
So this check that I just put in, and so okay, I'm going to void it. So I'm going to click my void button.
So do you have to do it in the ledger entry or not, and not the record of the check?
Well, this is the record of the check.
Okay. All right. I don't think I saw that void option.
What happens is when I clicked the void button, I got this message. What do you want to do? How do you want to do this? Do you want me to take this entry and just zero out the line items? Or do you want me to create a second journal entry that offsets this one?
Okay, well, our situation was that we mailed a check to someone and it never got there. So I wanted to void the first check in the accounting system and create a new one.
So I think either in that case, really, one of these is not necessarily better than the other. If you create the offsetting entry, one word of caution is that journal entry, that offsetting entry is going to be dated today. So if I've had a wide space of time, but in this case, we can go either way. I can zero out this entry, and you see what he did there. He put in the zeros. Then over here in the entry memo, voided. July 19th, 3:03 p.m. by administrator. Total amount was this. Check mailed, but never cleared. So I can add my own, I can provide my documentation for why we did something, and then I'm going to save.
And then would you go into the regular accounts payable to create the replacement check?
I really like using accounts payable for paying bills, because then that lets me look. This is not true for all churches, but it's certainly true for some. You're working on a pretty tight cash flow, and sometimes it's a cash flow that needs to be managed carefully. So accounts payable really lets me look at, pick and choose what I need to pay, what I can pay today. If I need to accrue something and hold it to later, accounts payable lets me do that. So I'm really a fan of letting both.
That's basically what I did. I deleted the first check and then I created a new one. The only issue I had was the first check was created at the end, towards the end of June. And so the June reports would reflect it. But then July, so I feel like I'm going to have to tell the person who reconciles our checking account that he's going to see a check in July that looks like it was paid in June, but wasn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, now I would have dated the second check in July.
I did,
Okay. Okay.
but
Uh, and
somebody looking at the June reports that have already been created and distributed, and looking at July, in theory, might see a second, like a duplicate entry, or will the
not,
year-to-date?
not a duplicate, because remember what I did when I voided this check was zeroed everything out.
Even though it was June.
As long as June is not closed. Now, if I was looking at a June check and June was closed, he would not have let me void this.
Oh, okay. All right.
Or the only way I could void it would be by creating the offsetting entry.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Glad to help. Glad to help. My old system forces an AP method, bills and then payments. Is there a reason not to go directly to writing a check if we're paying it immediately? I really like that record in accounts payable, even if I'm just turning around and writing a batch of AP checks. Because what the accounts payable system lets me do is say, okay, I've got this set of 10 bills. I'm going to write the checks for these 7. I mark those 7, and I write those 7 checks. So I'm not coming in individually, and then I'm doing one posting to the ledger at the end of writing those 7 checks rather than doing 7 postings as I'm doing things out of ledger entries. I really like working through the accounts payable system. Also, again, that lets me do accruals as I need to. So if I need to hold a bill, but I need to reflect on the financial statements that money is owed, then the accounts payable system lets me do that accrual. This number is your best friend if you've subscribed to Premier Support. And our support texts are available from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. Well, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.